It's nearly time to drive my Volvo 242 out of the garage with its built 5-cylinder engine and all-new ECU setup. But there's just one thing standing in the way. Control arms. But of course, I'm not just bolting the old setup back on. Today, I'll rebuild and refresh my control arms, and while we're in there, I'll share some details on the suspension and brake setup that I've gradually refined over the last 10 years. So I took these out because I wanted to refresh them, and I had some undercoat on there that got a little bit mushy from having oil or other things dripping on it. There were also very, very old polyurethane bushings in these control arms. So these actually were put in before I got the car. I estimate these to be somewhere between 15 and 20 years old, so they are very old. Not only were these old, but they were causing an audible clunk when leaving driveways. I chose to try out a set of delrin bushings from STS Machining. They are admittedly more track focused than I need, but I've heard good things about them, so hopefully they'll work out. I'm always interested to try out different parts on this car and see what the impact and trade-offs are. After pressing out the old crusty polyurethane bushings, I cleaned the control arms and bushing pockets to remove all of the old undercoat and paint. I painted the pockets using Steel-It weld-through primer, knowing that I would need to tack in the bushing sleeves. STS recommends welding in these sleeves for the rear bushings to avoid any possibility of them moving out of position. After a few welds, the sleeves are secured in place. I left the bushings themselves in the freezer to shrink slightly, making them easier to install. I thought that this might allow me to drive them in with nothing but a few taps of the hammer, but I still had to press them in after all. After the bushings were installed, I painted both the control arms and bushing pockets with a few coats of MRO high solids paint, and then ultimately coated them with Wurth Stoneguard to protect them from rock chips. This is the same coating that I used on the body when I refinished the tunnel while the engine was out over the last year. It has a nice satin finish and should hopefully hold up well. I've gotten a few questions about my suspension and brakes in the car, so here's a quick overview. I chose Gaz Gold 40mm shorter coilovers and rear shocks. These are an excellent solution for 240 suspension. I highly recommend them instead of the typical Coney and Bilstein options. I haven't fully settled on spring rates. Currently I'm running 5K or 336 pound springs paired with 200 pound rear springs. Previously I ran 450 pound in the front, which was great for autocross and driving on smooth roads in the wide open western US, but was a bit too stiff for a lot of the roads that I drive on in Wisconsin. I intend to swap in some 350 pound iBox springs up front next. Above the struts, I'm running a set of camber plates designed and produced in a very limited run by some friends. These are inspired by the strut mounts that were used on Group A 242 race cars in the 80s, but have been modernized and enhanced to incorporate bearings for smoother steering. Below the coilovers, I'm using roll correction spacers from BNE Dynamics to correct the front suspension geometry due to the significantly lower ride height. I have my tie rod ends in the middle hole, which quickens the steering just enough. Without a doubt, one of the best parts of the car are its vastly improved brakes. These use 330mm rotors from a Volvo S60R on all four corners, but step up to 6-piston calipers in the front that are then paired with matching 4-piston rear calipers from a 2005 Porsche Cayenne or VW Touareg. The kit to adapt these calipers was designed and produced by a good friend. These are also now available from BNE Dynamics. The rear suspension has also required some modification to accommodate the ride height. The trailing arms, torque rods, and panhard bar are shortened to center the rear axle within the wheel arches. I'm using IPD's adjustable panhard bar, hybrid torque rods from BNE Dynamics,
and factory trailing arms that have been cut and lap welded back together 20 millimeters shorter. In both the torque rods and trailing arms, I have genuine Volvo rubber bushings on the body side and spherical bearings on the axle side. The spherical bearings on the axle housing that connect to the trailing arms are also from BNE Dynamics. The idea here is that having rubber on the body side will dampen noise, vibration, and harshness, while spherical bearings on the axle side will keep things tightly in alignment. For sway bars, in the front I'm using a 28mm drop sway bar, also from STS Machining, paired with a 19mm factory 240 sway bar in the rear.
I added in a pair of sway bar end links that are adjustable from BNE Dynamics or Kaplecki Racing, whatever you want to call it. I really just put those in because I was curious to try them. If they cause too much noise, I can always pull them out and put the factory style back in. But easy enough, and this allows me to then dial in that height so that hopefully it gets to a more optimal level considering the ride height of the car.
For additional chassis bracing, I'm using 242 GT firewall braces, an aluminum strut brace inspired by the braces found on Group A race cars, and lower chassis braces produced by IPD that mimic the braces equipped on 1978 242 GTs.
These came from IPD. They are a replica of a factory 240 brace that is designed to stiffen the cross member and stop that from deflecting and moving out of alignment. That makes a tremendous difference on these cars. Huge bang for the buck. These come in blue from IPD, which I absolutely hate. While they're out, I decided to just clean them up and add some Wurth Stoneguard to these. That should help with preventing further chips into the coating and also just makes them a little bit more muted fitting in with the rest of the car, because you can kind of see them from the side of the car if you look underneath.
Let me know in the comments whether or not you're interested in more detailed info like this. Okay, back to the task at hand.
And for the front, the sleeves that are in here, they're totally smooth on the edges, but you'll notice the factory ones have knurling on there. So what I did is I took a chisel and a hammer and I just pounded some kind of knurled edges into here. So hopefully this will grab onto the cross member and hold this sleeve in place so that that stays stable and it rotates the bushing itself. It's not the sleeve sliding on the steel.
With the control arms ready to go, this can all get bolted back in the car. The control arms get installed into the bushing pockets first, and then the whole assembly bolts into the cross member and body. I used the washers from the old bushings because they're thicker than what was supplied with the new delrin bushings, and then marked everything with a paint pen so that I can easily check for any fasteners loosening. I'll pull the wheels off to get a little bit better access, and then the control arms can go in. While these do just bolt in, I found installation to be significantly more tedious because of the new, more rigid bushings. I ended up having to pull one side back out after discovering that the rear bushing wasn't fully seated, which prevented the control arm from aligning with the cross member.
Putting Loctite on these bolts because I have seen examples firsthand of these bolts loosening up, and that's not cool. Anything holding on the wheel, pretty important.
From this angle, you can also see the reinforcement plates on the control arms. While these aren't new with this iteration, they also aren't something that came on all 240s from the factory. Yoshifab sells these plates that can be welded to the control arms to support the arm. I've seen some cases where 240 control arms tear, so this seems like cheap insurance, especially given the large sway bar that I'm running. The control arms are in and the front suspension is finally ready. With this step done, the Volvo's complete enough to go out for its first drive, but that'll have to wait. If you're enjoying the journey, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode when we finally roll this car out of the garage after months of work. Thanks for watching.